Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Talking Timepieces, where we talk about watch collecting and horology. Um, Today's episode was inspired by a question from one of the audience, one of our wonderful community members, and they had asked about the difference between a radio controlled watch versus a GPS watch or other kinds of radio controlled because GPS is also a radio signal. It's just in a different bandwidth than the time signal that we know of. But the nice thing about that is it gives me another opportunity to point out how important timekeeping is for modern civilization. Because when you think about it, the reason that we worry about having a time signal uh, transmitted is because a lot of things need it. A lot of things need it. In fact, um, there are issues currently going on with timekeeping in the power grid because as we shift from turbines and the like to solar panels and fuel cells and other types of alternate energy, tidal power, uh, harnessed turtles, whatever technology we're going to be using for green energy. One thing about it that it doesn't have is rotational energy and inertia, which is what generators have. And the 60 cycle, and in Europe 50 cycle sine wave of the power curve of the you know power that comes out of your socket is the power that comes out of your socket is a one phase in the household, and then could go up to three phases depending upon the application. Washing machines usually have two phases, for example. But however, each of those phases is a 60 hertz sine wave. And in, like I said, in Europe, it's a 50 hertz sine wave. And a lot of applications actually use that sine wave for time regulation. I mean, in the oldie days, it was primarily electric clocks. But now that everything is tied into timing of some sort, there are a lot of machines that rely upon the 60 cycle uh, information from the wall to time themselves. And the switch to green energy is actually creating a moderately sized crisis in timing in the power generation industry. I mean, w- beyond not having enough power, as in pure energy, if the power drops below a certain point where the wave can't be maintained, it can collapse the grid as well. There have been blackouts that have been caused just by um, the wave collapse, not being at the proper frequency. There was energy in the lines, but it was unusable because well, actually, there wasn't energy in the lines because it shut down at the grid level because the sine wave could not be maintained. And that's actually, like I said, a big issue in power and the power grid. And it's something that we're going to have to address as we migrate forward into green energy, just to show you how important timing is at such a basic level. So just imagine how important timing is at the higher levels. So that's why every government, and some large organizations have a group dedicated just to keeping track of time. In America, it's the Naval Observatory. They use the stars to help them make sure that timekeeping is accurate in the United States. Uh, the Swiss, everyone uses observatories as timing references. It's just in the Americans' case, they formalized it. Naval Observatory, their primary task is to be guardians of time, as it were. And from the days of radio beginning, in the 40s and 50s, I think it started in uh, it could have started in the 40s, but it was definitely up and running by the 50s because a lot of things relied upon it. The Naval Observatory would broadcast a time chop over the radio so that organizations, companies, people could track that signal and make sure that their clocks are accurate. All right. Um, that alone demonstrates the importance of timekeeping. And every country has a radio signal that broadcasts the time. And the first radio watches just simply were quartz watches that used that radio signal to synchronize the clock on a regular basis. In the case of a quartz, the early ones did it maybe once a day. You don't need to synchronize a quartz watch all that often, right? It's quite accurate all by itself. In fact, the knight is wearing. Can I? Well, I don't want to screw up the. Sometimes you can see it depending on the angle of when I set up the shot. But I have a old broken Junghans first generation radio controlled watch on his wrist, or its wrist, I should say. It's an empty suit. It's non-sexual. But those first watches were the bee's knees. I mean, when the Accutron first came out, it's not a quartz watch, but it's an electronic watch, the first true electronic watch, and it had a 360 cycle beat, and it was the bee's knees in its day because of the ability to be more accurate than a mechanical wristwatch. It was the most accurate thing you could put on your wrist in that time. And then, of course, once we entered the 70s with quartz watches, to put a radio chip in the watch was expensive. And you had to modify the first generation Junghans watches had really funky looking cases to accommodate the antenna. But a quartz controlled watch that had a radio signal backup was again the most accurate thing you could put on your wrist. And so it had a following among people who needed accurate time or liked accurate time enough to sacrifice for it, or people who used accurate time in their job, engineers, pilots, the like, scientists. Um, Now, the problem with scientists, some of the first generation watches weren't anti-magnetic and the like, but it all depended on what you do for a living as a scientist and the magnetic fields that you encounter. You have to worry about your watch to that degree. I mean, obviously, since this is magnetically driven, the tuning fork, this has probably got crap magnetic tolerance. But the aspect of having a watch that actually listened to the radio signal sent out by the Naval Observatory in the United States, in Germany, whatever the Bureau of Standards here that they've done for it. I should look up exactly what organization. Maybe I'll go visit them or something. But so basically, the first radio controlled watches were just quartz watches with a radio chip in them that were set to a duty cycle to check the time occasionally based on the radio signal to synchronize the quartz watch. And then the quartz watch being accurate runs cool. In fact, current chip scale atomic clocks have an internal oscillator because the quartz mechanism kind of buffers the output for the user side of it, but it gets synchronized from the atomic clock vibrational input from the cesium atom or the rubidium atom jiggling around in there, atoms. Hey, L Train, how's it going? Hey, Gian, how's it going? And so when we talk about watches that use radio, like I said, the first just told time. And then we moved on. It was a big period of time before we went from watches that used radio simply to tell time to watches that used radio for more than that. Um, I'm not counting like transistor radio watches, which were novelty watches. I think Seiko made one. A couple of other companies made radio watches. I know Seiko made a television watch, and that's arguably a radio capable watch, because, of course, television is a radio signal. And if this watch accepts that television signal, I mean, you had to carry a electronic module and attach a cable to the watch. The watch was essentially just a display, but it showed TV. And some had just like a transistor radio in it just to play, FM or AM. I forget which. Yeah, AM. So, well, some actually played both. And I don't really count those as radio watches, although they are radio watches. I'm thinking more of watches that use radio signal for timekeeping. But then again, if you go to the next leap of GPS watches and smart watches, the TV watch is an arguable intermediate technology, right? Because you can watch videos on your smartwatch now. That Seiko television watch was an ancestor, precursor, trailblazer, vanguard. And so, you know, novelty watches aside, once we started having smartwatches and navigational wristwatches, for example, I don't have a Garmin on me, or I'm not a big smartwatch person myself, but first generation Garmin's were navigational devices first and smart watches second. Smartwatches were smartwatches first and navigational devices second. The modern smartwatch can do both. Um, but GPS does time. And the reason the GPS signal, it's simply a time signal. The reason GPS can be used for navigation is since there are multiple satellites up there, the computer with the radio on the ground does the Doppler physics thing and calculates the position on the ground based on the difference in time chop between all of the satellites that are moving at relativistic speeds, semi-relativistic speeds. Because you do have to factor in um, special relativity into the signal, because there's just enough speed in those satellites to throw it off by enough to make it a nuisance if your primary application is timekeeping, right? That delay of the microseconds is noise in the time chop, right? So GPS can provide an accurate time chop, and that's why a lot of things use it. The server grid, 90% of it, most server farms have an antenna on the roof that gets the GPS signal to do the same thing that the old-timey radio did. But instead of listening to the Naval Observatory's radio signal, it's listening to the atomic clock time coming from that satellite. Because all a GPS satellite is an atomic clock attached to a battery, couple of solar panels, and a radio, and it's just beaming the time down to Earth, and we calculate position based on that. But a lot of things today now use the GPS signal for time. In fact, there are a lot of smartwatches that, like, say, for example, a hybrid with a set of hands. There, you could argue that they're also, timekeepers that use the GPS signal for timekeeping, and they just happen to have other information in them. But a straight up and down smartwatch, I joke and I don't call it a smartwatch. I always call them wearable intelligent devices, because to me, a smartwatch isn't really a watch. It's a wrist computer, which is a cool term. I mean, wrist computer goes all the way back to 50s science fiction. So that term has tremendous heritage as well, you know? So why not call the smartwatch a wrist computer? But I guess you could make the argument that it can pretend it's a watch. It can play the role of a watch, but its primary purpose is not to tell time. Its primary purpose is to be a peripheral to the cloud today. Its application counts too. Now, hey, Antares, how's it going? Now, there's another aspect to wireless, and that's what I thought was interesting with this G-Shock. This G-Shock has Bluetooth in it, so it can talk to your cell phone. So can, or actually, I guess you can attach it to any intelligent Bluetooth-enabled device, and that goes double, of course, for smart watches, because that Apple Watch doesn't just have GPS. It doesn't just have Bluetooth. It's got Wi-Fi. Um, Downstream, it may even have the Matter protocol, which is the newest. It just came out about 6 months ago or so, less than a year ago. The Matter protocol, and I'll explain it for you, the tech people, and for the people who aren't tech, I'll keep the explanation short. But Matter is a new lingua franca for the household Internet of Things, and it takes code from um, Zigbee, which is an industrial protocol, so it's relatively secure. It's at least inherently secure. You don't have to turn anything on to make it secure. It's secure out of the box, as it were. And it uses code from Wi-Fi for the data transmission abilities, and it uses code from Thread so that it can handle a multimodal multinodal network. And it's basically a layer that sits on top of a lot of IP stacks, so you can actually port it to different wireless standards. But basically, that smartwatch is eventually, well, actually, a modern smartwatch is a multimodal, multilingual radio device. Like I said, it gets Bluetooth, it gets Zigbee. Funny thing, I bet you the only thing it doesn't get is that naval observatory signal. I wonder if that's something I should check into. I strongly doubt it because anything that's got GPS doesn't need the old school radio signal. And actually, I'm going to make a note. They've got to still be broadcasting the old school signal because there are still some legacy applications that have legacy radio receivers in them. At least so I assume. But yeah, I strongly doubt that a modern smartwatch can pick up the old time signal from the Naval Observatory because it's using the Bluetooth. But the nice thing about having the internet is, as they say, the best way to get responses is to just have a wrong answer, and the number of people correcting you will be more than people who would have answered the original question. So, however it goes, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'll do some due diligence on my own part and look into whether or not the old school radio signal is even still being used by anyone. Hector, hey, Hector, how's it going, my friend? I'm doing very well. I went to the opera yesterday, Wiesbaden's opera. Nice, but Wiesbaden is a small city, so you get small city, home theater vibes out of Wiesbaden. Although it's a very lush opera house, it's relatively small because Wiesbaden's a small but rich city. But they don't patronize the arts as heavily as they probably could with given how much money the city has. So I saw The Marriage of Figaro, Mozart's, and the cast did a lot of scenery moving on their own. I don't know if that was an artistic choice, but it was I love Mozart, and I had never seen The Marriage of Figaro before. Oh, and speaking of, I was going to talk some more about quartz watches as after I finished talking about radio. And Bruno Sonla from Glashütte let me borrow a couple of watches. In fact, wristwatch check. I'm wearing one of their other pieces right now. These are very well finished and highly decorated quartz pieces, and there are some companies who've done that. Seiko Kinetics. I had an open heart Seiko Kinetic. I think whenever Kinetic first came out in the 90s or the noughts, I had a Seiko Kinetic first generation, and it had a display back, but it had a parlor trick. It had the weight spinning around inside, and Seiko was very proud of the Kinetic technology, so they put a display back on it. And there are some others. Grand Seiko has display backs, and some other companies have done display backs on their quartz. But in the case of Bruno, I mean, you could see the Glashütte wave from even from this distance over the web camera. Uh, I mean, you can also see the battery. But when you think about it, I think that watches like this are a progression of the marketplace, and I'm going to do a whole episode on that because the smartwatch did win the quartz wars, and to the average modern person, I'm an old guy. Quartz mechanical, they want a nice looking watch that they can take pride in ownership. And this is a nice looking watch that you can take pride in ownership, and this retails for 950 euros. All right. So we're talking about $1,000 watch. It's got a retrograde day of the week. It's got a big number date. Beautiful. It really does have a beautiful face. I'm looking forward to doing the review. I have one ding about it, and they have it makes it look cooler and boosts its perceived value, but it has screwed pin bars. So unless I have a good hand and have both of my screwdrivers right, I'm afraid I might scratch this. So I'm not going to do any fun with straps with these. And I'm not a big brown leather, but I'm wearing it because I don't want to scratch anything by making a mistake unscrewing these. Sometimes pin bar, spring pins work too. or have through hole. Well, you wouldn't want it on an elegant piece, but, it's a nice touch to have the screwed lugs, but, it does make it a nuisance to change the straps, but then again, most people don't change straps, so I don't think they're gonna take a big hit on that, and the strap is really nice. It has a little logo on it, and it's theirs. They make it, and it's lined. It's a really it you could spend 1,000 on a watch and not be as happy with it, in my humble opinion. I mean, in the $1,000, watch range, there are a lot of nice pieces. Not many nice looking dressy pieces, because this is I would put this between business casual upwards, and, in the $1,000 range, you're looking at mostly tool watches. So the fact that and they're leveraging the quartz to have the retrograde day of the week, which mechanically would be you could tack a 0 onto the watch, and the big date. So they're using quartz to leverage those functionalities, just in the same way, Fairer leverages quartz to give you, because this chrono is a flyback and a double, it's a rattrapante and it's a flyback, and the hour hand, can be adjusted like, some pieces. It's not a GMT, but you can change the hour hand without hacking the movement, but that's because they're leveraging the quartz, the Swiss super quartz movement that's in here. This isn't a, Seiko, Mecha quartz. This is the Swiss super quartz, so it does more things than the Mecha quartz, but it doesn't have the smooth, second-hand motion that the Mecha quartz does. But trade-offs are trade-offs. I prefer having both a rattrapante and, a flyback in the same watch, because I had an Omega rattrapante, and that was $5,000 worth of watch, and it didn't have a flyback functionality. It was just a rattrapante. And that's the thing about quartz. You can add a lot of functionality to the watch without breaking the bank. Like this other Bruno, right? It's got a retrograde day of the week, it's got big date, and it's a chrono. It's just a nice looking piece, and it's got a display back. Now I have to send these back. Let's see, and you can see the wave. I have to send these back, but, I'm actually tempted to make an offer and buy one of these, the blue one maybe. But at that point, I'd buy a new one and just hope for a discount. Um, but I do see what they're trying to accomplish, and I do see it as a natural evolution of watchmaking. I mean, one day you're gonna see smartwatches with laid out circuit boards, uh, just so geeks. I mean, they're gonna people are going to want to show luxury no matter the environment, no matter the technology, no matter the material. I mean, I was in the Tower of London. A lot of you probably visited there, the museum there. Queen once had aluminum jewelry and wore it like a boss, because aluminum at one point was a comically expensive and rare metal. So she wore aluminum jewelry. In the future, you might see, well, you have luxury smartwatches today, but I mean, you might see luxury smartwatches that go out of their way with workmanship, or with, I don't know, whatever the aesthetic dominates luxury at the time. Maybe Richard Mille will have one where they just have all the circuit boards separated with little wires that bounce, so the whole thing can be, more dynamic or something. Who knows? But, people are going to want to show luxury. People are going to wanna show style. People are gonna, like in my case, I don't wear watches to show luxury as much as I like to show interesting stuff. And so those drives are always gonna be there. People are always gonna want to, express their personal style at whatever level and whatever fashion they choose. And so, watches like the Bruno, I think, head in that direction. I mean, if you think about the following the G-Shock has, good, rugged, robust, nice piece. So if you think about it, bing bong, you got a good two-watch collection right there. You got everything down to the jeans, and then from the jeans down to whatever else you wanna do. The whole aspect of you know, wearing watches is not just about mechanical watches. That's a subgenre within watch collecting. It's not just about smart devices. That's a subgenre. It's not just about quartz watches. It's not just about vintage pocket watches. Those are all it's a chorus, just like, it's a huge chorus. And we all have a voice and we all play a part in this marketplace. And it's diversity and richness is part of the allure of watch collecting. I mean, you can have in my collection, I go from, something like my Mont Blanc, um, vertical clutch column wheel mono pusher chronograph to this reasonably nicely finished quartz piece. Diversity in the collection also gives you a lot more choices on what to wear, when you wanna wear it, and what circumstances you wanna wear them. you know? If I added this one, if I added this one or something like this to my collection, now I've got a business casual piece that I could wear anywhere, and then I'm not worried about it, uh, running poorly or maybe having issues or worrying about theft or, it's a good looking piece it's a quartz, it's reliable and it's accurate. As long as I make sure that the battery gets replaced every few years, I'll never have to think about it. See. Gian, I just realized the title, and this seems like a retro high tech for me. Well, as I was saying, a modern smartwatch is also a radio controlled watch. It's just available to be controlled over multiple bands, right? Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, in the future, maybe Matter, GPS, you know, they're all there. L Train, what is that watch? I must have missed you saying what it is. Oh, this one. Yeah, when I was talking a little bit about it, this is Bruno Sonna. They let me borrow a couple of their quartz pieces. These are highly finished dress quartz watches. And I was saying there are, display back quartz has been around a while. If you think about I've owned one, a first generation Seiko Kinetic, actually modern Seiko Kinetics. They put a display back on those because they were very proud of the fact that it used a swing weight, a rotary weight to charge a capacitor to run the movement. There are other quartz watches that have display backs. Grand Seiko display back quartz are beautiful, but then again, that's thousands of dollars, $5,000, $6,000 for a quartz watch. Whereas this is like €950 watch. And I wore it to the opera last night, and the lady I was with complimented me on how nice the watch looked. So, um, just wanted to talk about quartz watches and difference between radio controlled watches and GPS and the like. Um, do we have any questions? If not, been running a half an hour. I would call it an early evening, but obviously I always stay on if there's anybody who wanted anything. But if not, I don't like to just try to ham on for airtime. I usually say my piece and get off unless there's something else going on. So if that's the case, then I love you all. I'll see you next week. Have a fantastic week. And next week, I'm going to talk about cost of ownership in a watch collection, all of the things you have to think about. So take care, everybody. Have a great week. See you next Sunday.